In any case, the nature of Z-targeting forced Zelda to be more combat-centric, and with it, the world was forced to change. But it didn't. You still push blocks, only now you can't push them when you're engaged in combat, and you still open doors by shooting slingshots at eyeballs in the wall. Is that a puzzle?
The fuck? What was the point of that statement? Forced to change the world, but it didn't. You just said a whole bunch of nothing.
I already covered in the previous section how his arguments are flawed both in structure and fact, and how Egoraptor suffers from a fundamental misunderstanding of what Z-targeting actually does. Z-targeting did not make combat more complicated, nor put you into unfair situations. Z-targeting does not create a disconnect of any sort. Z-targeting does not segment the game into two pieces. Z-targeting doesn't put a damper on throwaway enemies like keys. It's a tool for clarity. It makes combat easier to manage. That doesn't dictate the rest of the game design, nor does it make any sense that these supposed issues are the result of not making the entire game based around combat. So it's a baseless conclusion built out of multiple baseless statements that is then used to make another baseless argument. It's one thing to claim that the world was forced to change, but it's a separate claim of fact to say that the world of Ocarina of Time didn't change from Link to the Past. We don't need to spend too much time on this point, because whether the world did or didn't change doesn't matter, because it's dependent on Egoraptor's point about Z-targeting forcing the game to be a certain way, a point that Egoraptor never made a coherent argument for. Although I would be remiss to not mention that Egoraptor fails to support this claim about the world not changing because he interrupts himself to change the topic to puzzles. And no, he doesn't remember to come back to it. So we have a worse instance of Egoraptor making a general statement of fact with nothing to back it up. Or as my brother put it, he's just saying shit. Anyways, from here, Egoraptor makes an abrupt shift in topic to puzzles, so I'll rewind a bit.
The world was forced to change, but it didn't. You still push blocks, only now you can't push them when you're engaged in combat, and you still open doors by shooting slingshots at eyeballs in the wall. Is that a puzzle?
No.
Like, seriously, is that a puzzle?
No.
Is looking around the room and finding an eyeball on a wall really super fun for people?
Yes.
Like, the game is 3D now, so everything isn't laid out before you like a map anymore. So I get that there's this sense that you walk into a room and aren't getting all the information about the room right away.
Egoraptor says he gets it, but he really doesn't. And we'll come back to this later. But more significant is the fact that he can't tell that eye switches are not puzzles. And if you can't correctly identify what a gameplay element is and what it's trying to do, you can't meaningfully critique whether the design succeeds at it or not. So we can already see how this will become an issue in his upcoming arguments.
But is stopping your forward motion stopping everything to look for a diamond to whack that's in a soulless crevice in the wall so you can open a door that leads to another room with a locked door and some other silly open sesame trick? Is that fun? Is this what you want?
Okay, so let's break this down because Egoraptor really muddies things by being so directly confrontational with the audience. When you strip away the appeal to ridicule, the rhetorical questions, what is the analysis? What is the critique? That your forward motion is being stopped. Stopping your forward motion describes an obstacle, which is something that games are full of. Games are all about setting up obstacles for the player to overcome. The obstacle being the locked door. How do you open the door? How do you overcome this obstacle? By looking around. This means something the player has to actively do. Why do you have to look around? Because as Egoraptor said earlier, the game is in 3D, so you're not getting all the information right away. But that doesn't mean the information isn't there. It just means you have to go and get it. What does that mean? It means the player is engaging in exploration and discovery. What does it mean to explore, to investigate, or to search into? What does it mean to discover? To uncover the unknown. But I guess exploration and discovery is silly and soulless. This is why I said earlier that he doesn't get it. And when you take away the loaded language, the appeal to ridicule, and break down the actual argument, it's complaining about the fact that gameplay obstacles function as gameplay obstacles, and that he doesn't like having to look around to find things.
Alright, let me explain something. A puzzle is something you have all the information for. The only thing standing between you and the solution is your own ability to put the pieces together in the right way.
This isn't entirely accurate. In many 3D puzzle games such as Portal, you have to look around to get all the information, to get all the pieces, before you can get to solving the puzzle. The more prominent issue is what I brought up earlier. The eye switch challenges are not puzzles. Even by his own description, they're not puzzles.
Is looking around the room and finding an eyeball on a wall really super fun for people?
Take note, looking around the room, having to find things. The challenge is precisely not about having all the information and having to look around. So Egoraptor is just fundamentally missing the point of what these gameplay challenges are about.
The satisfaction you obtain from solving a puzzle is from the aha moment, when the pieces fit and you have only yourself to blame for it. If you're missing a piece, how are you supposed to even get to a conclusion? You rack your brain, run in circles, go, what do I fucking do? Until you find the last piece on a whim and suddenly it all makes sense. You say, well shit! Or, come on!
The experience of running in circles and exclaiming, what do I do, can just as well happen with puzzles that are difficult. After all, what makes hard puzzles hard is that you can get stuck on them. The question then is the details of how and why. So much like I said earlier on the topic of fairness, a common pitfall when talking about getting stuck in a game is mistaking player error for bad design. So let's replay that last section while keeping this in mind.
If you're missing a piece, how are you supposed to even get to a conclusion? You rack your brain, run in circles, go, what do I fucking do? Until you find the last piece on a whim, and suddenly it all makes sense.
Take note of the phrasing, on a whim, meaning that when Egoraptor eventually found the item he needed, it was not a deliberate decision that he made. During his thought process when he got stuck and was racking his brains, as he's put it,
you rack your brain, run in circles, go, what do I fucking do?
What he didn't do, and what he didn't consider to do, was look around. Even if for whatever reason Egoraptor isn't describing his own experience, his critique here doesn't accommodate for the fact that other players can make the consideration to just look around. His entire argument is contingent on the premise that no reasonable player will ever consider, I can't interact with this thing, maybe I should look around to find a thing that does. I'll also take this time to mention that yet again, he neglects to go through any examples, and the footage he has playing in the background has nothing to do with eye switches, so he's drifted off topic while already drifting off topic. Last point before moving on is that the more familiar you are with Zelda, the more telling that the footage he used is, because it's from the final dungeon of the game. Dungeons having items that allow you to interact with things you couldn't interact with before is not an unknown variable. It's something you've been taught and tested on throughout the entire game. So this is the third instance where it's indicative that Egoraptor has a lack of skill, and more importantly, that he has an attitude problem in response to that. We'll go into more detail on this later.
The satisfaction doesn't come from the door opening, it comes from the puzzle itself. If the puzzle itself isn't satisfying, well, there you go. The puzzle itself isn't satisfying.
Egoraptor is right that the satisfaction of a puzzle comes from the puzzle itself and not the door opening, but that much is obvious.
You see, in the original Zelda, you'd walk into a room, the doors would lock, but 5 cape horse sword dude looking guys who are fucking hard as shit surround you. They follow you around. When they see you, you can only attack them from the sides or the back. You gotta find vantage points, ins, outs, manage your health, dodge them when they gang up. It's daunting. It's interesting. It engages you. And it's really easy to understand. And because of all this, it's satisfying when you beat them. A door opening is like, oh, okay, cool, the door opened. You're not like, fucking finally the door.
Okay, but how is this a puzzle? That's where it's like you lost.
Like my brother said, this isn't a puzzle. This is one of the more egregious instances of Egoraptor failing to make a like-to-like comparison. His previous statement was about how the satisfaction should come from the puzzle itself. The implication being that the puzzles in Ocarina of Time aren't. So if he's going to make a comparison, he should have compared eye switch obstacles in Ocarina of Time to eye switch obstacles in The Link to the Past. He established eye switches earlier as an example of the world not changing.
The world was forced to change, but it didn't. You still push blocks, only now you can't push them when you're engaged in combat, and you still open doors by shooting slingshots at eyeballs in the wall.
So it begs the question, what's the difference between the ones in Ocarina of Time versus the ones in Link to the Past? After all, his comment about silly open sesame tricks could just as easily apply to Link to the Past in the first Zelda as it does to Ocarina of Time. Instead, he contrasted lock and key obstacles with combat, which is completely irrelevant. So Egoraptor hasn't said much of anything about why any given puzzle might be unsatisfying, and his only argument is the fact that you can get stuck as a consequence for not looking around. But that much should have also been obvious. I also want to point out how Egoraptor actually went through an example this time. He made direct reference to the video. He started at the beginning of the challenge when you walk into the room, described what was in it, and used video as an analytical tool to explain why that particular room with the dark nuts was so interesting. A beginning, middle, and end could be identified because the scope of the referenced gameplay challenge was a single room, so nothing was left out. At the very least, it can be said that an effort was made. The same cannot be said for what he's been saying about eye switches and puzzles on a general level. The fact that he was able to go through an example with the first Zelda, but not go through literally any examples for eye switches in Ocarina of Time shows an uneven and unbalanced approach to using examples and making comparisons.
But look, that's not to say puzzles or whatever can't exist in Ocarina of Time's combat-centric universe. But sliding spiked death pucks coming out from around the corner you can't see is just bad fucking design. It's bad design in any game. It's no different in Zelda.
It's not to say that puzzles can't exist, but spike traps are bad design. Yes, that is about as incoherent as it sounds. To refresh people on how language works, when you use the word but in this context, it's to contrast what you're about to say next with what you've already mentioned. Spike traps are wholly unrelated to what he started his sentence with regarding puzzles. Remember that clarity is an important part of critique, which is why I'm pointing this out. This means that he failed to clarify what his stance was and how it wasn't at the extremes. It's unclear what kind of puzzles would be appropriate in Ocarina of Time based on Egoraptor's understanding of it. And a problem that I've already identified with Egoraptor is how his thinking is constrained to the extremes. In any case, since Egoraptor isn't really talking about puzzles anymore, but about the design of spike traps, let's hear what he has to say on this topic.
But sliding spiked death pucks coming out from around the corner you can't see is just bad fucking design. It's bad design in any game. It's no different in Zelda. You don't get a get out jail free card. You gotta roll 3 times. In the first Zelda, you see that shit. In Link to the Past, you see that shit. In Ocarina, oops.
Oops is right. This is the fourth and most obvious instance of Egoraptor's lack of skill and poor attitude, so we can finally close this thread. Similar to before where Egoraptor was blaming Z-targeting and just plays a clip of him getting hit with no context, anyone can reasonably question what Egoraptor was doing beforehand that caused him to get hit by the spike traps in any of these clips that he was playing in the background. And what Egoraptor reveals is that the reason he couldn't deal with spike traps in 3D is because he's using the same approach he would in 2D, expecting things to work the same way in 2D where almost everything is on screen. No further analysis was put into how he could adapt and deal with obstacles in 3D, if there were things he could have done differently to avoid being hit.
Yeah, I know. That's the nature of 3D, but if it doesn't work in 3D, you change it. If the formula doesn't work, you change the formula.
Spike traps move in predictable paths that you can see and hear at a safe distance. You have to go into their path in order to be hit by them. The spike trap does not need to be in your field of view at all times for you to understand where it's safe and where it's dangerous. All you need is a functioning sense of object permanence. But he failed to consider any other means, any other skills that you could use to avoid being hit by the spike traps. And these are the kind of questions you need to go through when doing any sort of critical analysis, especially when it comes to the topic of fairness, because it's easy to fall into the trap of mistaking your own personal failings for design issues. But Egoraptor is so quick to blame the game that he doesn't even consider this. This is what I mean by an attitude problem. It's the inability to acknowledge that he can make mistakes and that there are areas he can improve. Having a bad attitude doesn't just affect your ability to critique, but your ability to enjoy games. It isn't good to be a sore loser. This extends to his argument about eye switches as well. It's the same issue. Just like how he lacks skill to observe his surroundings to keep an eye out for spike traps, he lacks skill to observe his surroundings for eye switches.
Why do I gotta leap across these platforms? There's no challenge here. I hold the joystick up. Just because the scenario's treacherous doesn't mean the game is actually treacherous. I could've just walked forward in a straight line. Heck, I can close my eyes here and do this. Is that treacherous?
Yet again, we have another abrupt change in topic. This time, it's about level design. It should go without saying, but not everything in a game or in a level is there to make things more challenging for a player. Dungeons and the game as a whole are full of gameplay challenges, but it's not about cramming every meter of space with a combat scenario. You will have moments of high intensity and low intensity. Even in 2D games, this is the case. To make any meaningful point here, Egoraptor would have to effectively argue how a specific moment of low intensity should not have been one, which involves looking at the rest of the level design, its pacing, structure, and the surrounding gameplay challenges, which Egoraptor makes no attempt to analyze at all. Pointing out a random hole or platform and saying that it isn't that challenging is not meaningful critique.
Hey, or better yet, how about some nice interesting combat scenario here on these platforms, huh? Like some kind of enemy that'll circle around you and you just gotta time your jump across or like block his path with a bomb or something. Or like, how about an enemy you have to slash at enough to knock it off the edge? But when you slash him, he also kind of slashes and knocks you back like another well-designed enemy in some other fucking game. I just made that up. And it exists in a good Zelda game.
A thing that moves in a circle that you have to time your movement across. You mean like a spike trap? Look, he even draws it like one. It is especially rich that Egoraptor is so condescending here when one of his proposed redesigns is for a thing that both already exists in the game and that he was just complaining about a minute ago. When you aren't working from clear design principles, you start contradicting yourself in strange ways like this. His criticism changes on a whim based on how he feels in the moment rather than any consistent analysis. He went from talking about how the world didn't change when it supposedly should have, to how I-switch puzzles aren't satisfying, to how spike traps are bad design, to how there's no challenge in random parts of the game where you hop between platforms. He's jumping from topic to topic sporadically, losing track of his thesis and failing to support his claims for each. And unfortunately, the structure and argumentation of Egoraptor's video is only going to keep degrading from here onward.